Good morning. This is the Truth Seeker 333. Today I'm going to want to talk about ENFP and validation with INTJ relationship. And the reason I wanted to touch on this is I was watching another video that was talking about ENFP and their need for emotional validation. Since I'm on my 25th year of marriage with an ENFP, I myself being an INTJ, I thought I might have a little bit to add to this. And some of the aspects of the frustrations of ENFP INTJ relationship and some of the benefits of and some of the positives of the INTJ ENFP relationship. So validation for ENFP. First of all, it's not that the INTJ cannot validate an ENFP. It's just that the INTJ cannot validate the ENFP in every circumstance, in every scenario. You know, the ENFP is that is the water that they swim in. It is the ocean that they live in, the environment that they thrive in, that they automatically can validate somebody else. They can see what somebody else is needing acknowledgement for. And when I say acknowledgement, I mean emotional support. The ability of the ENFP to feel for another, to feel with another at the same time. The INTJ obviously lacking in this ability. Not that the INTJ is not feeling, for their partner or their friend, but that, excuse me, there's a little bit of a traffic situation here. Anyway, that the INTJ does not have the capacity to reflect that back in all circumstances. It just, the emotions go into the INTJ, they bounce around inside of them. They feel those emotions inside, but they don't come back out. Not all the time. Okay? So, a lot of it has to do with faith, believing and knowing that your partner or your friend is actually, feeling what you feel, okay? Because they're not transmitting it back to you. This is how, a lot of times the INTJ gets accused of being cold and incalculated and just everything having to do with a formulaic view of the world. Everything has to be logical. Not really, but that's how it comes across. I think most of the time and in varying degrees, and depending on where you are as an individual INTJ and how much you have grown as an individual in your own life. Have you gotten to the point where you're able to express your emotions a little bit better than you had, in the past, and so so we have the ENFP seeking this emotional validation, and this is what I think causes the most of the emotional, conflicts between the two, that the INTJ uses the incorrect word or uses the incorrect intonation of the voice, thereby hurting the feelings of the ENFP. And so how do we, as INTJs, learn to validate our partners and our friends more? Over the years, I have come to realize that, I come to realize this reality of the relationship. And so it is a conscious effort. It is sometimes it's natural, but most of the time I'd say it's the bulk of the time it's going to be a conscious effort on the INTJ's part. And as such, the INTJ is not going to get it right 100% of the time. But they're going to do their best. So, seeing as how the spectrum of my emotional communication is not as varied or large, it's not as big as an ENFP. There's not as much of there's not as many tools in my toolbox to communicate the various intricacies of the different types of joy or sadness or whatever. It's just a very, I got my 4 tools. I've got joy, I've got sadness, I've got happiness, I've got depression or whatever. I'm just giving this as a word picture, but basically in using that tool, we have the ability to communicate certain emotional responses by, let's say if I say something like, oh, and I raise my eyebrows and I inflect my voice. There's a type of emotional communication going on, between the INTJ and the ENFP. As basic as it can be. It's not as complex, but I think that the ENFP needs to realize that the INTJ is developing and can be encouraged to develop these skills of listening and reflection, to understand the how those emotions will go into them and how to communicate those emotions back out. So it's just it's a learn by doing. We learn by doing, and over time we learn from our mistakes, and so that brings me to something I wanted to touch on, and that is the topic of empathy. And I've touched on this before, and it's basically that when you feel something else that somebody else is feeling at the same time that they're feeling it, or maybe later you empathize, but then that's not really what most of the culture looks at, because the majority of our culture is more feeling types and more of I want to say extroverted types, but what I mean to say is more of the conscious feeling types that have the ability to empathize with one another very quickly and in real time. That is the ability to share. There's this transmission of emotion back and forth. Okay. That's not how it is with the INTJ the majority of the time. The majority of the time it's external feeler transmitting emotion to the INTJ, emotion going into the INTJ empathizing with the ENFP, but then not enough of that emotion, or maybe none of it, transmitting back to the ENFP. And here's what I wanted to point out. That doesn't mean that the INTJ is not empathizing with the ENFP. It just means that that emotion is not being reflected back. It means that it's not transmitting back. I just want to point that out, because when an ENFP is looking at an INTJ and they see this stone-faced, stoical, and then the monotone response. It does not mean that the INTJ is not feeling all of that inside, but it could mean that the INTJ is not allowing himself to feel it. He is feeling it, or she is feeling it inside subconsciously, but maybe they are fearful, they don't want to acknowledge the emotion, or maybe they just are stubborn and they do not want to be in that emotional state at that time. That's the reality of the situation. As an INTJ, it's very taxing on us to be in that emotional state 100% of the time. But the more we develop as an individual, the more resilience and the more endurance, emotional endurance we develop. We are able to take the ball and run with it, more, run it across the goal, and do a better job of that. So I just wanted to talk about that today, and I wanted to say God bless everyone. We're going to leave it at that. Have a great week. We are in the fall of 2018, and what a beautiful season we are in right now. God bless you all. Keep seeking truth. Bye.